My name is Ethan Mercer, and if there is one thing I learned before turning 33, it is this. Money can solve a lot of problems, but it does absolutely nothing to stop the people closest to you from treating you like garbage. In fact, sometimes success only makes them hate you more. My family spent years believing I was a failure, and the worst part was that they enjoyed believing it. They loved the idea that I would eventually come crawling back to them, broke and humiliated, begging for help after wasting my life chasing some fantasy career online. What they never realized was that while they were busy laughing at me behind my back, I had quietly built an empire large enough to buy every house on their street without blinking. And when they finally discovered the truth, it destroyed every lie they had built their lives around. I grew up in a family that worshipped appearances. My parents cared more about how things looked than how they actually were. My father, Richard, had spent 30 years working at the same insurance company, slowly becoming the kind of bitter man who believed suffering was proof of character. My mother, Diane, treated social status like a religion. Everything was about perception with her. The right friends, the right clothes, the right stories to tell at church gatherings. My older sister, Vanessa, was their masterpiece. She was a corporate attorney with perfect hair, expensive heels. I stayed quiet and the emotional warmth of a marble
Every family
countertop.
dinner felt like a performance.
My parents
designed
adored
to
her
remind
because
me
she
I was
made them
beneath
look
them.
successful. My father would
Meanwhile,
ask if I was
I
still
was the
doing my little
disappointment
computer
who
hobby.
dropped out of college at
Vanessa would
19 to
smile
start an
politely
online
while
business
explaining how
nobody
unstable
understood.
entrepreneurship
I still
was
remember the
compared to
day I
real
told them
careers.
I was
My
leaving
mother
school.
constantly asked
My
when
mother
I
stared
planned
at
to
me
stop
across the
wasting my
kitchen table
potential
like I
and
had
grow up.
personally
I
embarrassed her
stopped
in front of
defending
the
myself
entire
because
neighborhood.
there was no
She
point.
kept stirring
They had
her
already
coffee
decided
long
who
after
I
the
was.
sugar dissolved.
Nothing I said
Shaking her
mattered,
head
so I
dramatically
focused
while
on
my
work
father
instead.
sat there grunting
While
every
they
few
were busy
seconds
looking
like an
down on
irritated
me,
bulldog.
I was building companies.
My mother told
One
me
business
people
without
became
degrees
two,
ended
two
up
became
broke
five.
and miserable.
By 28,
My
I owned
father said
property
I was
outright.
lazy and
By
scared of
30,
hard work.
I had
Vanessa
investment
did not even
accounts
look up from her
generating more
phone when
passive
she told
income
me
each
I would
month
regret
than my
it for the
father
rest of
earned
my
in a
life.
year.
But I never
None of
told
them knew that I had
I
already
drove
started
modest
making
cars
money
around
online
them,
through
wore
a
simple
niche e-commerce
clothes,
store I built
and
from my
kept my
bedroom.
success
Back
hidden
then it
because
was
some
small,
twisted part
barely
of me wanted
enough to
see
survive
how far
on,
their arrogance
but I
would
could
go
already
if they
see
thought
the
I was
potential.
still struggling.
They could
The
not.
moment everything finally
them,
cracked happened
anything
on a cold
involving
Thursday
the internet
evening
was
in
fake
November.
unless it came with
My
a
mother
corporate
had
title
texted
and a
me
business
earlier
suit.
asking if I could stop by because they needed help with something important. When I walked into the house, the atmosphere felt strange immediately. My father was pacing near the fireplace. Vanessa sat on the couch holding a glass of wine with this smug little smile on her face. My mother stood with her arms folded like she was preparing for a courtroom speech. I knew within seconds that this was not about help. This was an intervention. My father stopped pacing and looked at me with visible disappointment. He said they had all been talking and they were worried about my future. According to him, I was 32 years old and still drifting through life pretending to run businesses that clearly were not going anywhere. Vanessa chimed in and said everyone in the family was concerned because I never seemed to have stability. Then my mother delivered the line that honestly made me wonder if they were all insane. She said they had decided it was time for me to finally stand on my own feet without relying on them anymore. At first, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood her. I asked what exactly she meant because I had never asked them for money in my entire adult life. Not once. I had paid my own bills since I was 19. But my father suddenly raised his voice and started ranting about how they were tired of enabling me. Vanessa laughed and said everybody knew my businesses were probably failing and that I needed a reality check. Then my mother calmly told me that if I was really doing fine, I should have no problem surviving without their support. My father pointed toward the door and said maybe spending some time on the streets would finally force me to become a man. The room went completely silent after that. Rain hammered against the windows while all three of them stared at me waiting for a reaction. They expected desperation. They expected me to argue or defend myself or maybe finally confess that they were right about me all along. Instead, I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because the entire situation felt surreal. I was standing in a house worth maybe $600,000 while carrying a watch worth more than their kitchen renovation. They genuinely believed I was broke. They genuinely thought they held power over me. The disconnect between reality and their fantasy was almost unbelievable. I picked up my jacket calmly and told them if that was how they felt, then fine. My mother opened her mouth to say something else, but I walked out before she could finish. I got into my black sedan, which they assumed was some cheap used car, and sat there listening to the rain hit the roof. Looking at myself in the rearview mirror, I realized something important. I was not heartbroken. I was not even angry anymore. Mostly, I felt curious. Curious how people could be so blind. Curious how far they would go once they believed they had finally pushed me beneath them permanently. And deep down, I already knew this story was not over, not even close. The weeks afterward were strangely quiet. None of them called to check on me. No messages asking if I was okay. Nothing. It was like I had been erased from existence overnight. Meanwhile, I spent my mornings in my penthouse office overlooking the city skyline, taking meetings with executives in Singapore and London while my family told people I was probably homeless. Through mutual friends and relatives, I slowly started hearing the stories they were spreading about me. My mother told church friends my internet businesses had collapsed and that I was too stubborn to admit I needed help. Vanessa apparently joked at a dinner party that I might finally learn the value of hard work now that life had humbled me. They were not just misunderstanding my life. They were actively rewriting it into a cautionary tale because it made them feel superior. One evening my cousin Caleb called me sounding uncomfortable. He said he had overheard my mother telling relatives that I was sleeping in my car because I refused to get a real job. Then he hesitated before admitting Vanessa made a joke about eventually hiring me to fetch coffee at her law firm once I became desperate enough. I sat there staring at my phone after the call ended, feeling something inside me slowly harden. The cruelty was not even the worst part anymore. It was the enjoyment behind it. They genuinely loved the idea of me failing. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. Caleb mentioned the family had started doing Sunday dinners every week where they basically turned me into the main topic of conversation. So that night, I drove over there. Not to go inside, just to watch. I parked a few houses down in my silver Aston Martin, a car they had never seen before because I never brought it around them. Through the dining room window, I could see them laughing together under warm lights. My father raising a wine glass, my mother smiling proudly at Vanessa while she talked. I could practically hear the conversation from outside. Vanessa discussing one of her cases, my parents bragging about her success. Then eventually someone mentioning me, followed by disappointed sighs and little jokes about wasted potential. Standing there on the sidewalk, I realized something painful. They needed me to fail. My existence as the family disappointment was part of the foundation holding their identities together. Without me, they would have nobody to look down on. 2 days later, my mother called me out of nowhere. Her tone was annoyingly cheerful. She said they needed help moving old furniture over the weekend and since I probably was not busy, I should come help. I almost laughed. After throwing me out of their house and telling everyone I was a failure, she still assumed I would come running the second they snapped their fingers. I told her I was busy with work. She responded with this little condescending chuckle and said my pretend businesses could wait because family mattered more. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. Then came the moment that changed everything permanently. It started with an alert from my bank about suspicious activity. At first I thought it was phishing spam, but when I logged into the account, my stomach dropped. Nearly $15,000 had been withdrawn from one of my older savings accounts. The account was tied to a joint plan my parents opened years earlier when I was a teenager. I barely used it anymore and honestly forgot it even existed. Both withdrawals happened in person at a branch near my parents' neighborhood. I called the bank immediately. The teller explained that my mother had come in claiming she had authorization to access the account because of a family emergency. Hearing those words made my blood run cold. I could not even process what I was hearing. My own mother had literally stolen from me. I called Caleb right afterward, still trying to understand why they would do something that insane. He went quiet for a second before carefully explaining that Vanessa had recently put a huge down payment on a luxury SUV. Apparently, my parents called it a reward for all her hard work. The second he said that, everything clicked into place. They stole my money to buy Vanessa a car. That night, I drove to their house again and parked across the street. Through the front windows, I could see Vanessa standing in the living room holding up car keys while my mother took photos. My father laughed and clapped her shoulder proudly. Watching them celebrate with money they stole from me snapped something deep inside my chest. Whatever loyalty I still felt toward them died right there in that moment. A few days later, My mother texted me casually saying she hoped I was not upset about the savings account because the money had just been sitting there unused and Vanessa needed it more. Then she added one sentence I will never forget. "You can always make more money. Family comes first. No apology, no shame, just entitlement." That was when I stopped thinking emotionally and started thinking strategically. I hired lawyers immediately. Every account, asset, investment, and property connected to me was locked down tighter than a fortress. Then I hired a private financial investigator to dig into my family. If they wanted to treat me like an enemy, I needed to know exactly who I was dealing with. Over the following weeks, a picture started forming that completely changed how I viewed them. Despite all their arrogance, my parents were drowning financially. My father had quietly borrowed against his retirement account years earlier. My mother carried massive credit card debt trying to maintain appearances. Vanessa, despite her fancy corporate title, lived recklessly. Luxury trips, designer clothes, expensive restaurants, all funded by debt she could barely manage. Their entire lifestyle was smoke and mirrors. Meanwhile, my own life exploded upward. I expanded my businesses internationally. One of my software companies got acquired in an 8-figure deal that made headlines in several industry publications. I attended investor galas, charity events, and private business conferences where I networked with people powerful enough to reshape markets with a phone call. Quietly, my name started carrying weight in circles my family could never access. But I still kept everything private from them because timing mattered. Then fate handed me the perfect opportunity. A major national business magazine reached out wanting to feature me in an issue focused on self-made entrepreneurs who overcame criticism and failure. The editor had heard my story through mutual industry contacts and loved the narrative. I accepted immediately, but I requested one thing. I wanted the article released during the same week as my parents' annual charity fundraiser. That fundraiser was everything to my mother. Every year she hosted this massive event pretending our family represented success, generosity, and prestige. Local politicians attended. Business owners showed up. Vanessa treated it like a red carpet event. It was the one night every year where they got to feel important. The article dropped the morning of the fundraiser. By noon, my phone was exploding. Friends congratulated me. Business contacts shared the feature online. Former classmates sent messages in complete shock. The article detailed my companies, my investments, my properties, and my estimated net worth. There were photos of me speaking at conferences in Europe, shaking hands with investors, standing in offices overlooking Manhattan. The headline called me one of the most quietly influential entrepreneurs in the tech commerce space. Then came the calls from my family. My mother called first, sounding breathless and panicked. She kept asking why I never told them any of this. My father got on the line demanding to know if the article was exaggerated. Vanessa did not call at all. I ignored every single one of them. That evening, I attended the fundraiser for the first time in years. The moment I walked into the ballroom, the entire atmosphere shifted. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People turned toward me instantly because half the room had already read the article that morning. I could actually see confusion spreading across my parents' faces from across the room. Their carefully constructed image of me had collapsed publicly within hours. Then the real humiliation began. One by one, people started approaching me instead of them. Investors, local business owners, even city officials. They congratulated me on my success while my parents stood nearby looking completely blindsided. I watched my mother force smiles that kept twitching at the corners. My father looked like he could barely breathe. But Vanessa looked furious, not embarrassed, furious. Eventually, she cornered me near the bar and demanded to know why I hid everything. I looked her dead in the eyes and calmly reminded her that she spent years mocking my career, calling my businesses fake, and telling people I was a failure. Then I asked if she still thought I would make a good coffee runner at her law firm. The color drained from her face instantly, but I was not finished. A few minutes later, my mother tried pulling me aside to apologize. Except it was not really an apology. She kept saying they only pushed me because they wanted me to succeed. She claimed they always believed in me deep down. Listening to her rewrite history in real time was almost impressive. Then I mentioned the stolen money. Her expression changed immediately. I told her calmly that my lawyers already documented everything. The bank withdrawals, the authorization fraud, all of it. I explained that I could have pressed criminal charges weeks ago but chose not to because public humiliation was more educational than prison. My father stepped in angrily. insisting family should handle matters privately. I laughed for the first time all night and told him that was interesting considering they had no problem publicly telling people I was homeless. Neither of them had a response. The next morning, I transferred ownership of the stolen amount into a charitable foundation under my name and sent them the receipt along with one message. Consider the debt paid publicly, since private respect was apparently never an option. After that night, everything changed permanently. My parents tried reaching out for months afterward. Suddenly they wanted family dinners again. Suddenly my mother posted childhood photos of me online talking about how proud she always was. Vanessa attempted to reconnect through awkward texts pretending nothing happened. But it was too late. They did not miss me. They missed access to what I had become. What hurt the most was realizing they probably would have continued treating me like garbage forever if that article never came out. Their respect was conditional. It depended entirely on status and money. Once they realized I had more of both than they did, their entire attitude shifted overnight. That is when I finally understood something important. Success does not change people. It reveals them. I stopped attending family gatherings after that. Caleb is still the only relative I stay close with. As for my parents and Vanessa, I keep them at a distance, polite enough to avoid drama, but cold enough to protect my peace. Some bridges are not meant to be rebuilt after they burn. Some people only love you when they think you are beneath them. And honestly, the strangest part of all this is that losing my family never felt as painful as finally seeing